will be people who are watching you and you don't know it. There will be people who are listening to you and you don't realize it. And I wonder how many Christians, if we honestly examine it, are wasting our influence in this world. So I'm going to get pointed here for a minute. How many people know more about your views on sports, politics, hobbies, movies, celebrities, but know little of what you think? Know little about your relationship with Jesus. Know little of what it is to receive forgiveness through Jesus. And I'm speaking to Christians here. If you're not a believer, you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm going to get to you in just a minute. But if you're a follower of Jesus, I got to ask you, how much do people know of your influence about Jesus rather than all these other topics that we so lovely dive into? See, maybe it's because far too many professing Christians are honestly just more equipped to talk about the Kardashians than they are Christ. Friends, there are a lot of topics that I could tell you so much detail on. I got to be honest, my heart gets convicted when I realize how much I know about sports. How much I know about the hobbies I enjoy, and yet I will talk about the Bible and I will say, oh, that's just so difficult to understand. There's so much history. Sports change every single day. I'm a big fan of Georgia football. Go Dogs, 2-time national champions, coming up on number 3. And when it comes season, I'm going to know who plays, what, I'm going to know their stats, I'm going to know everything. And there's a lot of people like me in that. And then we'll open up the Bible, things that many of us have had access to since we were children, things that have not changed for thousands of years, and we'll say things like, I just don't understand it. Friends, do we care about our influence? If we care about our influence, we're going to do what Solomon did, is we're going to dive into the wisdom of God, because we know as we dive into the wisdom of God, it's going to spread to the people around us. Parents, I got to ask you, do you love your children enough to dive deeply in your relationship with God so that it will spread off on them? Do you love your neighbor enough that you will dive deeply into your relationship with God so they can experience Jesus through you? Do you love your friends enough that your love for God will overflow in such a way that they will see it in the details of your life? What is your influence? By the way, if you're here or you're joining us online and you're not a believer, you're not a follower of Jesus, I told you I'd get back to you. I want to ask you this question: how are you influencing us? Because our influence is not just about what we say. Our influence is not just about the status that we put Christian by our name. Our influence is seen in our passions and in what we do. And by the way, Solomon's going to learn this in a very hard way, as we will see across the next few weeks. That sometimes Solomon said a lot of the right things and did a lot of the wrong things. Years ago, I had the privilege of working on my doctoral degree while I was pastoring here. I was a young dad at the time. I just moved to Savannah, just became the pastor of this church, and just had a little girl. And I thought, that seems like a good time to start another degree. So I dove in. And I was trying to figure out, how do I balance doing school and being a pastor and being a dad and being a husband? And so I found that I had to just kind of incorporate some of those things together. And so sometimes in my daughter, my oldest daughter, her name's Ellie, in her early years, sometimes like me hanging out with her looked like this right here. See, it's a little bit hard to see, and so I found this old keyboard that I had, and I would put it on the desk right below my keyboard, and she would sit in my lap, and she would just type away on her pretend keyboard as I was typing away doing my work. In fact, it was rare for my daughter to see me without either the computer in front of me or a book in my hands. Every time I was reading a book, I would have a highlighter in my mouth. And I remember one day just looking over at my daughter. She had grabbed one of her books, she found one of my highlighters, and she was just sitting there reading one of her books with a highlighter in her mouth. And I began to see the influence that I had on her, not just what I wanted, rather it lived out in my life. See, I'll tell you, to this day, my oldest daughter loves to read. And I honestly wonder how much of her love for reading, her love for school was developed in her by her just watching her dad do school when she was so young, when she was so influential. See, it's not just about what we say we believe. It's not just about going out into the world and saying, hey, we want you to know about Jesus. It's about being so passionate in our relationship with God that we can't help but to show to others. Friends, we will say all the time, we want to reach this city for Jesus. We can't reach this city if Jesus has not first reached us. How are you influencing those around you? By the way, if you're here and like, John, I'm not an influencer. I want you to also examine this. It's not just about who you're influencing. It is also about what is influencing you. Did you notice what he said in verse 10? My son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. Through most of the rest of the chapter, you know what Solomon's going to say? Watch out. Be careful. Recognize who is influencing you. Who are you putting around you? See, Solomon understood that evil and the sins of this world will lead to our destruction. And so when we are enticed by movies or music or relationships or friends, pictures and articles, when we are told these things aren't a big deal, we have to ask the question, what is influencing us? How is it influencing us? Where is it leading us? Because we can't simply use the excuse that I just don't know any better. I didn't realize that it was a problem. Because according to verse 20 through 22 of this same chapter, Solomon's going to say this, wisdom is standing in the street and it's calling out to us. Ignorance is not an excuse. We must be ready with an honest examination of the influence around us. Let's continue over to chapter 3, starting in verse 1. My son, there it is again. He's talking to his son. My son, don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commands, for they will bring you many days of full life and well-being. Never let loyalty and faithfulness leave you. Tie them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will find favor and high regard with God and people. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, know Him. He will make your path straight. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. This will be healing for your body and strengthening for your bones. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Then your barns will be completely filled, and your vats will overflow with new wine. Do not despise the Lord's instruction, my son. And do not loathe his discipline, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, just as a father disciplines the son in whom he delights. Solomon continues talking to his son. Challenged the reader, he has challenged his son to pursue God in such a way that we hold on to wisdom, that we know truth, that we have understanding. And so I want you to understand